Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. Hi, Femme Dracula. Now, before we get to the usual, I thought, since it's probably on everybody's mind, because it's just impossible to avoid, it's talk a bit about the fucking genocidal horror that is unfolding in Gaza. I'm not going to show any of the footage. I'm sure anybody who's watching this has already seen plenty of it, and it's hard enough to get it out of my head to think about anything else, having seen so much of it myself. Instead of what I'm going to do first this time is I'm going to talk about something. We're going to look at something that is arguably considerably more ghoulish, but much less. Okay, yes, I saw that, and congratulations. But at least not as just viscerally, visually upsetting. And my camera, what's happening? There we are. So, okay. This is the first of the speeches. This is from 3 days ago, which is already this is from PBS NewsHour, and it's already mislabeled the Israel-Hamas war. That is the deceptive framing that is being used, as if Israel were making any distinction between Hamas and other Palestinian factions and just random Palestinians, and they've explicitly made it clear they're not making any such distinction. They're not even pretending to make such distinctions. I mean, we have seen some of the clearest statements of genocidal intent, clearest public statements in modern history. And the thing to remember as we look at Joe Biden is he could end all this with a phone call. Israel can only do what they're doing right now because the U.S. is sending the weapons, the U.S. is providing them with a fucking air force, and the U.S. blocks any effort to hold them accountable internationally for the many atrocities they commit. So here's the first. This is from a couple of days ago. I have a feeling this is the best part of the speech, so savor it. It's downhill from here. Absolute fucking ghouls.
You know, there are moments in this life, I mean this literally, when the pure, unadulterated evil is unleashed.
Already we're getting off to a wonderful start, because he's literally the guy who has it in his power to stop the pure, unadulterated evil that we are all fucking bearing witness to. He could put a stop to this immediately. Israel would simply have no choice. They are totally dependent on the U.S.
People of Israel lived through one such moment this weekend.
The moment being Palestinians breaking out of the ghetto in which they have been imprisoned and subjected to slow death by starvation and disease, quite deliberately, which incidentally is a form of genocide recognized under the UN Genocide Convention for 17 fucking years.
The bloody hands of the terrorist organization Hamas, a group whose stated purpose for being is to kill Jews.
That is simply not true. What they do, there are two aspects to this particular bit of propaganda. One is to pretend that Hamas has not actually repeatedly made all sorts of attempts to come to terms with Israel. Ever since they got elected into the government in 2006, ever since then, incidentally, the U.S. and Israel do not allow the Palestinians to have elections because they didn't like how that one turned out. They have, since 2009, been offering mutual recognition in exchange for an end to the occupation as the terms that they are willing to accept. They have repeatedly offered Israel long-term ceasefires on the basis of those terms. Israel has actually violated every single ceasefire that they have claimed to agree to. Hamas has actually stuck to them. And Israel actually, if you look at their foreign ministry's statistics, you'll find on like rocket fire, rocket is already saying a lot for these projectiles which don't have warheads in them. You can see during the periods when there is a ceasefire, there's no fire coming from Hamas. However, Israel does not end the blockade that keeps basic humanitarian goods out of Gaza. That was the state before the just absolute horrors of the past few days. Horrors for which this motherfucker is 100% responsible.
This was an act of sheer evil. More than 1,000 civilians slaughtered, not just killed, slaughtered in Israel. Among them...
At this time, that would have been the total number, which would have included the Palestinians slaughtered by Israel.
At least 14 American citizens killed. Parents butchered using their bodies to try to protect their children.
Again, I mean, now, the stuff he's about to get into, first of all, content warning, it's graphic, and second of all, he's about to list a bunch of stories that were put out by Israeli propaganda about alleged Palestinian atrocities, and every single one of these stories has fallen apart. Either it's been outright refuted, it's been retracted, or subsequent evidence has seriously called it into question.
Stomach-turning reports of babies being killed. Entire families slain.
I mean, this is accurate if it's in the sense that Israel has been doing this. There's no evidence of the Palestinians doing it.
Young people massacred while attending a musical festival to celebrate peace.
First of all, it was a musical festival on the perimeter of a fucking concentration camp. But this is one where it's really actually quite unclear exactly what happened. There's very little footage. It's extremely sketchy. It mostly just shows people running away. One thing that it does show very clearly is a fair number of armed police mingling with the ravers. It was just before anything went down. Now, in addition to this, there was a military base nearby. So it is really unclear exactly what went down. Palestinians haven't had anything to say about it, and what Israel has offered has been like just you cannot be confirmed with independently at this point.
Women raped, assaulted, paraded as trophies.
Yeah, the claims that Palestinians raped anyone have been retracted by major media outlets because there's no substantiation.
Trophies.
The parading as trophies also, at this point, has been refuted. The image in question was of a woman who turns out to be alive, according to her mother. And she was being taken to hospital.
Families hid their fear for hours and hours, desperately trying to keep their children quiet to avoid drawing attention.
I mean, to the extent... what's fucked up about this, what is deeply fucked up about this, is that these are accurate descriptions of shit Israel has done. But he won't say a word about what Israel has done.
And thousands of wounded. Alive, but carrying with them the bullet holes and the shrapnel wounds and the memory of what they endured.
I mean, like, what about the more than 50% of the population of Gaza that is under 20, and the substantial, nearly half, who are under 15, and all they have known is slow genocide by starvation and disease, punctuated by occasional massacres. Massacres that this motherfucker has never once said a single critical word about in his entire endless political career as a professional racist.
You all know these traumas never go away. There's still so many families desperately waiting to hear the fate of their loved ones, not knowing if they're alive or dead or hostages. Infants in their mother's arms, grandparents in wheelchairs.
We're going to just skip over this bit. Because again, first of all, there's like no evidence of it being done by Palestinians. He's being very careful in the way he says it, I think because he's well aware that there's no evidence of it.
We will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
Now, this is something you hear a lot of. This idea that Israel has a right to self-defense and stuff like that. And here's the thing about it. A right to self-defense is not the same thing as a right to use force in self-defense. If you are occupying somebody else, you do not have a right to use force in self-defense against them. Your right to defend yourself from any armed response of theirs is simply to stop occupying them. That is literally the only thing that you are entitled to do. The Palestinians, on the other hand, do have a right to self-defense. They do have a legal and moral right to resist occupation, and they have a right to use force to do it and to receive support from whoever is available to provide some. What is often left out of narratives of the Palestinian counteroffensive that started on the 7th of October is that it was in part in response to pogroms going on at the time, ongoing, with Israeli state support in Huwara and other Palestinian towns, both inside the Green Line, inside what is like the internationally recognized territory of Israel, and in the West Bank. That's been going on with horrifying frequency over the past year and even longer. Palestinians have every right to defend themselves from that.
There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination.
Like you do, motherfucker?
Stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people.
First of all, the Palestinian right to self-determination and to end occupation and apartheid is fundamentally incompatible with the existence of a racist colonial regime on the territory of their fucking homeland.
They use Palestinian civilians as human shields.
This is a lie. This is a huge lie. Israel trots it out every single time somebody points out that they've been bombing just obviously protected civilian targets like hospitals and schools and refugee camps and people's fucking homes. And there's no evidence of it. All they do is they say, oh well, there were people in the place that we bombed, therefore they are human shields. Meanwhile, Israel has an official acknowledged policy of using Palestinians as human shields. It's called the neighbor procedure. Supposedly the Supreme Court of Israel banned it, but they've been using it as if that had never happened. Because it's Palestinians, and the law just doesn't kind of apply to them, at least in the sense of giving them any kind of rights that they can rely on.
Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price.
I mean, this fucking ghoul talking about terror and bloodshed, what exactly do you fucking offer? Like, this country has brought war to every inhabited continent. There is nobody in the world who has more moral low ground when it comes to talking about war and atrocities and terror.
Innocent life is heartbreaking.
Fuck you.
Like every nation in the world, Israel has the right to respond, indeed has a duty to respond.
Yes, the duty is to respond by ending the occupation, ending apartheid and letting the refugees get back, and ending the strangulation of Gaza that has made that one of the most densely populated areas in the entire world uninhabitable. The UN, like a decade ago, said if things continued as they were at the time, and they have, Gaza would be uninhabitable by 2020. It's 2023 now. Things have gotten steadily worse. I mean, they don't have fucking drinking water. Even before Israel, like, literally cut off the water to them. They did not have safe drinking water. It was like 97% of the water was not potable. Because Israel blows up their fucking sewage treatment plants. Their water treatment plants. And then does not allow anything that could be used to repair that infrastructure back into the country. I see, Adrian, that there's something going on with chat. We'll say it again. I have the YouTube window open now. So, with any luck, I'll be able to catch it this time.
These vicious attacks. I just got off the phone with the third call with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yeah, Netanyahu at this point had already openly said that they were going to just flatten Gaza and kill everybody who was in there.
And I told him, the United States experience what Israel is experiencing, our response would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. We also discussed how democracies like Israel and the United States...
democracies like Israel and the United States, like, you'd seriously fuck off. I mean, as undemocratic as the United States regime is, Israel just doesn't... It has roughly 50% of the population who, because they don't fit... because under the race laws, simply don't have a right to vote. Like, even that just bare minimum... standard of democracy is not met by Israel.
Are stronger and more secure when we act according to the rule of law.
Fuck you! Seriously, like, I mean, you can tell that there is no supernatural out there. Because if there were any kind of moral supreme being in the world, this motherfucker would have been struck by lightning just by saying this. Because if there's one thing the U.S. has never given a shit about, it is what the rule of law says about the use of military force, what international law says about it, and what the international law says about countries that arm genocidal racist regimes. I mean, if Israel followed international law in this case, what they would do is end the occupation, allow the unrestricted flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and pay massive fucking reparations to the Palestinians, while allowing any refugees who want to come back to do so. That's what international law says Israel's obligations are. The bare minimum. I mean, there is other stuff as well. But of course the US has been blocking every fucking effort to hold Israel accountable under international law.
Terrorists purposely target civilians, kill them. We uphold the laws of war.
No, you fucking don't. You've still got a fucking concentration camp on Guantanamo that is a direct breach of the Geneva Convention.
The law of war. It matters. There's a difference. Today, Americans...
A difference between what? This is so fucking incoherent apart from everything else.
Across the country are praying for all those families that have been ripped apart. A lot of us know how it feels. It leaves a black hole in your chest when you lose family.
Now, this motherfucker is a black hole.
Feeling like you're being sucked in. The anger, the pain, the sense of hopelessness.
I mean, those are the feelings I get every time I see this motherfucker on television, to be honest.
This is what they mean by a human tragedy.
Fuck you.
Atrocity. On an appalling scale.
On an appalling scale. It is nothing compared to the scale of what was already had already been announced by the time he gave this speech, what was already very much underway.
We're going to continue to stand united, supporting the people of Israel who are suffering unspeakable losses and opposing the hatred and violence of terrorism.
God, fuck you.
My team has been in near constant communication with our Israeli partners all across the region and the world.
And now one thing that you have to keep in mind is that public pronouncements, we're going to be moving on. We've seen enough of this horrible, just bullshit. But here's the thing. Governments know that other governments have a public who they have to sort of keep quiescent. Nobody actually puts a lot of stock in the public pronouncements of other governments that they have a relationship with. When the U.S., and we're going to see Biden doing this in just a moment, when the U.S. sometimes will, hand-wring and express some concern and say, maybe you don't kill all the people in Gaza, maybe kill just 60-70%, leave a few. The Israeli government knows perfectly well that that's something that is being said because Biden's people know that people in the U.S. are watching what's going on and are utterly appalled by it, a lot of them. Especially people who are likely to vote for his ass. What matters, the message, the language that Israel and the U.S. actually speak to each other is the language of military aid. As long as the flow of weapons from the U.S. to Israel is uninterrupted, Israel correctly interprets that as a green light to continue doing whatever they're doing. Okay. So, that was... So let's move here.
They operate by the rules of war. The rules of war.
Oh, fuck off.
And there are rules of war.
God, first of all, this is just so fucking incoherent. And second of all, the U.S. doesn't get to lecture anyone on rules of war. If the U.S. followed the rules of war, every single fucking president in my lifetime, and basically every single president since World War II, when a lot of these rules of war were written in the first place after 1945, would be in prison, would have died in prison.
I've known Bibi for over 40 years.
Bibi, fuck you.
A very frank relationship. I know him well. And the one thing that I did say...
40 years means that he's known him from back when he is believed by a lot of people in Israel, based on available evidence, to have been involved in the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in the 1990s. He's saying that they go back that far. That is an admission.
That it is really important that Israel, all the anger, frustration, and just, I don't know how to explain it, that exists, is that they operate by the rules of war. The rules of war. And there are rules of war.
What does that mean, though, when you say... we know what it means. It means fuck all. Because the only language that Israel will understand is actually meaning that it's time to stop, is any indication that the tide of military aid is being stemmed. If if the U.S. cuts them off, that's how they know they've gone too far. If the U.S. even talks about cutting them off, they know they've gone too far. They know they need to reel their heads in. As long as we have this fucking incoherent blather here, where one of the leading war criminals in the world talks about the rules of war, they know that they don't have to... he's not even being specific here.
And,
at this point, this is from today. So, Israel has been just eliminating entire fucking neighborhoods off the map. They told 1.2 million people that they just need to evacuate in 24 hours, knowing perfectly well that's impossible, knowing there's no place for them to fucking go. No, that's just an excuse so that they can say, oh, well, anyone who's left in here is a combatant, and it's okay for us to do this to them. I mean, they fuck that. Fuck this so much.
And I believe Israel is doing everything in its power to pull the country together, stay on the same page, and we're going to do everything in our power to make sure Israel succeed, and God willing, to bring home those Americans who are in harm's way.
Oh, seriously, it's like, yeah, there are a lot of people in harm's way right now. There are lots of people in harm's way. I mean, this motherfucker didn't show any interest. I mean, a Palestinian-American journalist was murdered by Israeli snipers. And then Israeli cops attacked the pallbearers at her funeral on camera. This motherfucker didn't give a shit about U.S. citizenship then. But now, all of a sudden, he cares about U.S. citizens. I mean, he cares about, like, people's lives and safety. He has not actually shown any interest in the lives and safety of Palestinians, and don't even talk about the fucking humanitarian corridor bullshit. That is just a roundabout way of saying ethnic cleansing, as Palestinian spokespersons have pointed out as well. Because if the US and Israel herd the Palestinians into Egypt, first of all, Israel is like outright bombing people who are evacuating according to their instructions. That happened just earlier today. Yet again, that is a regular feature of these fucking massacres. Second of all, who's to say that they're going to be able to go back when this is over? Who's to say there's going to be anything for them to go back to? These are people who were ethnically cleansed out of their homes. That's how they ended up in Gaza in the first place. And now they're being ethnically cleansed out of there, and the U.S. is trying to make that look like a fucking humanitarian gesture. Like, seriously. As ghoulish as Netanyahu is, as ghoulish as that prick Gallant, or any of those motherfuckers are, the people in Washington who pretend to have some kind of moral high ground, pretend to care about the rules of war and all this shit, and all the while are making sure that Israel has the means to continue just murdering people with wild abandon. Those are the biggest fucking ghouls on the planet. I mean, this is just evil, and I hope that it ends, and that Palestinians manage somehow to prevent what Israel has announced as their intent, because Israel has said that they want to just genocide people. And Western leaders, one after another, have gone, oh yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea, go Israel. Fucking German politicians talking about it. Just reminding us that denazification remains on the to-do list. The US can end this with a fucking phone call. But they won't make that phone call because they're fine with it, because the Palestinians have nothing to offer them. And oh well, that comment showed up fine. Are you in the Discord? I'm just going to open up the Discord and say it there if it isn't working on YouTube. But we're going to move on at this point. Change gears. And yeah. And let me see. Where the fuck is my window? Oh, this is the window. There we go. And I'm just going to change gears, and we're going to do some JabroniCon, because yeah, just to talk about something a little less grim that I'd feel a little bit less powerless about.
Don't.
We're going to look at Hassan debating his uncle on trans issues, and this is the Young Turfs are once again showing that they're just gonna move right on, just adopt far-right talking points.
Pretend that I brought it up. No, you brought it up, and you made it a giant issue, and you're the one hurting the progressive cause and the trans rights cause.
Yeah, like, what? This motherfucker, this is like Joe Biden talking about the rule of law. You don't give a shit about either of those things.
We win on every goddamn issue on trans rights. Why are you going and dying on the hill that no one agrees with you on? You're going to ruin trans rights on other issues.
Like, you're gonna ruin trans rights for Cenk Uygur, the guy who obviously is the one who we care about when we're talking about trans rights. Obviously, trans rights, it's all about him.
Okay.
We're going to lose because you're being so extreme. And
Yeah, he's being extreme. I can't wait to hear what totally non-fucking extreme thing yielded this tantrum. Here's the Discord link, by the way.
And then every ally you have, you're like, nope, I'm going to be more pure than them, so I'm going to burn their bridge down.
I mean, it's great just watching cis people argue with each other about trans rights. I mean, that is basically how the whole discourse works.
I don't want any allies. Okay, well
Okay.
then don't have any allies.
I love it when people who aren't allies are like, you say some just absolute bare minimum thing, like, maybe don't bring up black on black crime when cops are murdering black people, or say, something like that. And it's like, oh, well, if you're gonna be such a purist about it, I'm not gonna be an ally anymore. It's like, you weren't one to begin with, motherfucker.
Oh my god, I'm gonna lose my mind. Alright. Cenk Uygur is here, ladies and gentlemen. It's a classic
Is that how he pronounces it?
uncle-nephew face-off, as I have talked about already. For those of you who don't know, Cenk wrote a book. This is in the face. Cenk wrote a book called Justice is Coming, How Progressives Are Going to Take Over the Country and America is Going to Love It, which is, I mean, I'm a very cynical person.
I mean, you immediately see this book and you know it is going to be in charity shops before the year's out.
I don't think... I'm a very pessimistic person. I don't think it's happening anytime soon, but maybe you'll make an argument for that. Yeah, we're going to talk about your book, and we're going to talk about another thing that you literally didn't tell me while you were announcing it, which is that you're running for president.
Jesus.
And of course,
Are you fucking kidding me? Like, why?
so I'm going to ask you why, or even how, but that's it. Those are
God,
the
I mean, this motherfucker's ego is as big as all outdoors.
we're going to be talking about. Before we get into any of that, though, let's start off with the Democrats actually doing something that is unheard of, unimaginable, which is showing backbone.
All smart progressives are going in the same exact direction, right?
Yeah.
So
I've been on that direction.
Yeah, so my co-host Anna's obsessed with the labor movement. Totally believes that's the answer.
Yeah, except to the extent that the working class includes people who aren't white and aren't cishet.
Nina Turner, who's another host on our network, just announced today that she set up a new group with Chris Smalls to back the labor movement and to even get funding for the labor movement whenever they go on strike, etc. And so that's what pushed FDR. That's what's going to push the next generation. Everything is trending in our direction. The only thing is we
like, what is your direction, though? Your direction keeps moving to the right.
can't, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And there's two icebergs ahead. And so I'm not Pollyannish. I see the icebergs probably better than anybody else does.
Yeah, I mean, of course he thinks that he sees these things better than anyone else does. He clearly, because this is just it's the fucking liberal brainworm, liberal pundit brain where you just sort of immediately are convinced that actually people who are pointing out that you're wrong about something, that like marginalized people who you're attacking or just sort of throwing under the bus, point out that actually what you did sucked, but you're the guy who actually sees the icebergs. You're the four-dimensional chess grandmaster.
And I'm really worried about it, okay? One is the progressive movement, honestly, and this is where you and I...
What is the
can
progressive
disagree.
movement? I've never heard anyone try to define what the hell the progressive movement is.
Getting too radical and too away from what most Americans want. And the second iceberg...
What do you mean by that?
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, so, look, So saying things like all sports leagues, including professional ones, has to allow trans women...
Yeah, the thing to keep in mind at this point is that banning trans women is a more recent development. Actually, trans women have had access at least according to the rules, have had access to pretty much every major sports league for ages now. I mean, it's sort of like when TERFs will like pretend that trans people are asking for something new, that trying to have access to public toilets is some new thing, when in fact trans people have been using public toilets all the fucking long, because obviously, where else are you gonna piss?
They don't have a choice, etc. That pulls at like 2%. You say, hey, it's a moral issue, it's really important.
Do you think
it's somebody's fucking human rights. It's being used as a justification to sexually assault little fucking girls because they don't look feminine enough, and therefore some disgusting piece of shit says, yeah, she's probably trans, we shouldn't, we need to make sure she isn't. It's like,
leagues are like the most important thing in the whole wide world.
Do you think it's actually a significant issue? Do you think that is a significant...
Yeah, tell us what you think is a significant issue for trans people. Mr. Right Wing Cis Dude.
Issue or a driver of the conversation, or cynically weaponized by Republicans with like some liberals taking the bait.
Some liberals being the other guy in his room.
And then having a conversation about it instead of being like, fuck off, nobody cares about this, stop talking about this immediately.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what the right wing does. They weaponize every single issue. But
which you're doing too.
Trying to get progressives to do is stop falling in the trap. So the minute they say it...
But do you think...
stop falling in the trap of defending trans rights.
Our side comes out and goes, no, this is the most important issue. And anyone who disagrees is a Nazi. You just called 98% of the country Nazis.
First of all, that's just not true. The numbers, he's just making these numbers up.
Okay.
What are you doing? You're alienating voters like crazy.
Yeah, this is like, this is so fucking rancidly old. So overdone. Martin Luther King wrote a whole letter from a Birmingham jail about what he's doing here. This sort of liberal thing where it's like, yeah, you can have justice, but not now, please. Not now. You're gonna hurt our chances in the midterms.
Do you think that organizers on the ground, both trans and cis, that are or members of labor unions are even using this as a talking point in any meaningful capacity, or is it simply reactionary Republicans bringing this up because they
and Cenk joining in
tried and unsuccessfully failed to push the anti-trans button with bathroom bills?
Except for the fact that they passed all those bills, which I despise. I hate those.
Hold on,
bills.
let me just.
He hates those bills. Why didn't you talk about that then, Cenk? Why are you always like slagging off trans people for wanting to do like wild, unreasonable shit like play sports?
Clarify something here. In the lead up to the 2016 election, you had the North Carolina bathroom bill that was anti-trans, right? You have to have the gender assigned at birth be the bathroom that you go to.
That totally failed.
Okay,
right.
That failed. That was so objectively a failure that Donald Trump came out and said, I don't give a fuck where Caitlyn Jenner shits as long as she's shitting in Trump Tower. Right? Something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing.
That's just such a wonderful image. I'm sure we all needed that mental image in our heads.
From the military.
Hold on. Let me finish.
That was also unpopular. Sorry, go ahead.
Let me finish. Okay? Yeah, you tried to ban trans people from the military. That was also unpopular. So, what did Republican interest groups do? The family, moral family, Christianity fundamentalist groups. What did they do? They went back to the drawing board and they looked for a reasonable sidestep that would still be anti-trans.
Yes, and the thing to note is that this is all part of a strategy, a specifically anti-LGBT strategy that was already very much in operation by 2016. Yeah, the Meg Kilgannon at the Values Voter Summit explained the idea was to try to drive a wedge between trans people and cis queer people, and then use successes, victories against the dignity and lives of trans people as a springboard from which to attack cis queer people, which is what we're seeing.
That would open the door to anti-trans conversations that they could push for that was more popular. What did they find? They found that Americans love the concept that is bullshit, meritocracy. What is the most meritocratic process in the entire country, maybe in the world? Sports. Americans love sports, and Americans believe that meritocracy is real, and it's especially real in sports.
And what would be it would be really nice in this context, in order to resolve the issue of trans women's participation in sports. If sports had if sports maybe kept score and had sort of a league table kind of thing, so you keep track of who's winning, who's losing, and maybe see if anyone has any particular advantage. Because the thing is, what's really just fucked up about what Jake is doing here is that it is trivial to point out that obviously trans women don't have an advantage. Apart from the fact that the requirements in order to have access to these leagues for trans women generally have a certain duration of time. You have to be on hormones and all sorts of other things. Even, in the case of the English Football League, it's the only one I happen to know, that, you have to have a certain there's a cap on your testosterone level, and it is substantially below the average testosterone level of cis women, actually. And you can actually just look at the fucking stats, see how many trans women are actually making it anywhere in any sport, and it is almost none. Trans women are massively underrepresented in sports. The trans women, trans people in general are a very small minority, and they don't even have proportional representation in sports. It is trivial to explain to somebody who is not just a reactionary fascist ghoul why all this fucking moral panic around trans women in sports is bullshit. Because all you have to do is look at the sports, look at who's coming on top, look at who's winning. Look who's getting the fucking gold medals, or winning the cup finals or whatever, and see how many trans women there are in there. And it's basically none. If trans women had this huge advantage that supposedly reactionaries, shitheads are telling us trans women have, they'd be all over the fucking medal ceremonies and, the Final Four, whatever. And it's not happening. And it's not happening because trans women don't have any advantage. And most people who are coming at this from a point of being just sort of honest and receptive to trans rights, polls show that people are overwhelmingly supportive in general, even if they don't know a lot about it, but uninformed or possibly misinformed, all you have to do is just point this stuff out, and people will generally take that on board. This is not an argument that is unwinnable, because you can actually look. Oh yes, the secret trans women, transvestigations. Yes, indeed. Everybody is secretly a trans woman. Alex Jones is secretly trans. Oh, sorry to hear that. Okay, this is like, of all the arguments this is an easy one. Because you just have to look at the top level of any sport and say, where are the trans people? If they have such a fucking advantage, where are they?
So they changed the narrative away from trans people can't pee and poo in the fucking bathrooms to trans people want to destroy sports. It was simply just another way to attack trans people.
And the thing is that trans people were already in sports. The major sports leagues, including the Olympics, have had rules allowing trans people to compete in the appropriate gender category for over a decade, sometimes even well over a decade. So we've got actual data on this. You know, how many trans women have actually even made it to, even represented a country in the Olympics, and it's none, actually.
Which is precisely why I think a lot of people correctly looked at that and went, why the fuck are we talking about this? This is ultimately marginal. You just want to fucking eliminate trans people from public spaces. And I have never given an ounce of legitimacy to that argument, despite what public polling says, because the reality is no one gives a fuck about it.
Yeah, and the thing about public polling is you can't see what Cenk is doing in order to just justify saying, telling trans people to fuck off, is acting like there is no difference between somebody having an opinion on something, having only ever heard the case against it, when they haven't heard the case for it. I mean, and this is something like, if you've ever done anything related to sales, one of the things that they train you in, I mean, I did like fucking shitty telemarketing interviewing bullshit a long, long time ago, and this was drilled into us, and this is drilled into any salesperson who, particularly if you're working on commission, you elicit and address objections. Why? Because if somebody has not heard the case for them, for a thing, that is, and is against that thing, that is not the same thing as someone who has heard the case for and the case against and comes to the conclusion that they are against it. Most of the people who are saying in those polls that they don't want trans women in sports, most of them have no idea that trans women have been there all along, for years now. And they have no idea, they've never heard anyone explain why trans women don't have any advantage. They just hear it, and they have a reflexive response that is based on a complete lack of information. And the way you deal with that is to make sure that they actually get accurate information. What Cenk is doing is saying that you should just sort of knee-jerk join in with the shitty opinions of a bunch of uninformed people without making any attempt to inform them. Without any attempt to get accurate information in front of them. Just sort of say, oh wow, so you have this wonderful shitty opinion. I guess we should just give up on the rights of a group of people I'm not a part of.
Let me tell you something that's more important than public polling, however. Because you brought up...
So far, I don't even see where we disagree.
Okay, so you brought up...
This is one of Cenk's favorite maneuvers. Is when somebody points out how full of shit he is, like, oh, well, actually, I agree with you. No, you fucking don't. Somebody just pointed out the disagreement.
State legislatures, Republicans, passing incredibly, horrifyingly psychotic anti-trans bills.
Yeah.
Okay. Bills that basically make it legally impossible for trans people to exist in certain states.
Okay, and they're passing this. Yet there is no viable single-issue voter out there that is desiring these anti-trans bills.
Not only that, polling shows that even people who vote for Republicans, who've already demonstrated that they are some of the worst people just by doing that, those people don't like these bills. Meanwhile, you have other polling that says that over 80% of the respondents think that the incitement against trans people is a serious problem that needs to be dealt with.
Although, if you ask, Americans directly about, what do you think about a 14-year-old trans girl, participating in a swim meet, they might say 56% might say, fuck that, that's wrong, we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, and how many of those people have any idea what any of that means? How many of them know what the requirements that a trans girl would have to meet in order to participate as a girl in a swim meet, for example?
But the reality is, there isn't any real momentum on the ground for anti-trans shit, okay?
It is entirely imposed from above. And that is why it is so telling that Cenk immediately jumps on that bandwagon.
Not give a fuck about trans people overall. The overwhelming majority of voters actually have apathy for trans people. They just don't care about it because they think that there's no trans people in their lives whatsoever. Republicans, however,
And this is a key point, actually, right here, because most people, either they don't know any trans people, because there aren't a whole lot of trans people, or at the very least they don't think they've ever met a trans person, because they mostly couldn't tell one way or another. And the thing is that means that portrayals in the media are extremely important. And when somebody like Pesevenk Uyghur does his thing and starts talking this shit and acting like it's unreasonable for trans people to want to continue have the right to participate in sports, a lot of people who know nothing about this issue, who've never really given any serious thought to it, who probably either haven't met any trans people, or don't know any trans people, or don't realize they know any trans people, will look at that and say, well, if a sort of mainstream, reasonable, liberal sort of dickhead like Cenk says that this isn't good, then maybe there's something to what the fascists are saying.
have
Hola, Phoenix.
pushing the anti-trans button over and over again and made it their major fucking talking point.
That's right.
That has yielded horrifyingly bad results for them. And instead of like fucking assassinating Christopher Rufo, for example, who's one of the leading guys here at the Manhattan Institute that was like doing the CRT stuff, doing the anti-trans stuff.
Yeah, he's also the one who like not only made up the groomer libel, but explained in a Twitter thread why it was a lie that he was encouraging people to tell, and how you could twist words to just barely make it work. I mean, Chris Rufo is at the heart of so many of these campaigns where white supremacists decide to pretend to be angry about something they never showed any interest in.
Instead of going, dude, what the fuck are you doing? You ruined our midterm chances when Biden had a historically bad economy, when a red tsunami was supposed to happen.
Yeah, not to mention, not just a historically bad economy, but the thing is, the Democrats, when they're the best predictor of how the Democrats are going to do in a midterm is whether there's a Democrat in the White House, or at least one of the best predictors, because on the whole, Democrats get their asses handed to them in the midterms when there's a Democrat in the White House, because the Democrats can only look progressive when they're not in a position to implement anything. Then they can talk a blue streak about all the great things they're going to do. But if they've got somebody in the White House, and they've got a majority in Congress or whatever, then they immediately put the brakes on that, and suddenly, it turns out the parliamentarian is like fucking Voltron or something and is all-powerful. And oh wow, the power level of Joe Manchin is over 9,000. Shit, we gotta just stop talking about anything that our voters care about, or at least doing it.
That was a major failure on their part. One that actually has led to Kevin McCarthy's ouster as the speaker right now, a domino effect of like the Republican Party imploding in and of itself, partially because the only thing that they have been looking for, the only thing that they have, the only tangible policy position is just increasing the dial of transphobia. But
that's not fair. I mean, they're also doing a lot of white supremacism, and the Democrats have been joining in that.
There's not enough people on the ground who are demanding it, and those who are demanding it are increasingly more psychopathic, which is pushing away normal fucking Republican voters who are just like, I just want tax cuts, man. Like, I'm racist, sure, but like, what the fuck's going on? Like, I don't give a shit about this. Like, why are you talking about dismembering children's genitals all the fucking time? You sound like a psycho. They're getting outrage fatigue, and
here's like Jeg sitting here trying to figure out how we can make because the whole way that this transphobia arc on the Young Turf started was that 11 months after Anna Transphobian did a video on why the whole birthing people outrage was just complete bullshit that right-wing people manufactured, she decided to join the right-wing bullshit campaign on pretending that the real problem that we're all facing is that somebody said birthing people. And then Jeg was like, oh, I gotta get on this fucking action, to the extent that at least one trans person who worked for them quit because it was such a hostile transphobic environment, and he immediately just went on to Twitter to give her an epic clapback, impugning her mental health and basically just laughing at her for like wanting to be treated with dignity in the workplace. I mean, this is so absolutely not an unforced move. They chose this.
It has demonstrably been a failure. And that's part of the reason why you don't see Trump talking too much about wokeness or trans people. He like brings it up every now and then in his commentary, but it is far less than Ron DeSantis, wouldn't you say, who is an objectively less popular candidate.
Yeah. So, with the exception of Trump and DeSantis thing, which we can get into, I actually agree with everything you said.
Okay. This is one of his techniques. When he, because it's about like distracting people from the fact that there is a fundamental disagreement here.
So now let me give it to you from my perspective and why I'm concerned about it. So
why he's concerned
Republicans
about
bring
it.
this up because they're fishing and fishing. All their positions are deeply unpopular. So they're fishing for one position that they could finally get some sort of popularity on. Right?
Well, if that were how they settled on trans rights, on attacking trans people, they would have abandoned it by now because it isn't making them popular. It is actually scaring. It is actually scaring 80% of fucking voters.
Right. So they dig all the way down to trans sports at the high school level, and they get over 70% saying, "Okay, no meritocracy. We shouldn't do that."
Yeah, 70% who don't know, and 70% who also don't fucking know how many trans people are actually, when they have these bans. Like, these bans on trans kids participating in sports that have happened in some states. And it turns out, in those states, there's literally never been a trans person at any level of student athletics who has ever participated. Or in one case, it literally banned exactly one person in the entire fucking state. It was literally a law. More people voted in the state legislature for that fucking law than were affected personally by it after its passage. You know, I mean, the idea that this is, we're going to hear how this is something insurmountable and we shouldn't even argue in favor for that.
Right? So, if at that point, you and I agree, like, we fight back when they propose a bill, and we do the best we can, and we aggressively make the case that you just made, and that I make all the time on the...
You're not making it. When you, like, defend anti-transphobia and over the fucking birthing people nonsense, that's not making that case. You are literally making the Republicans' case. You are literally, and there's a reason for that. I mean, I haven't heard, namely, that the Democrats at the federal level are doing nothing to defend trans people. And Cenk is nothing if not a fucking, like, coattail carrier for the Democrats. That is basically all he... I mean, he's not going to just completely make any fundamental critique of what the Democrats are, because he's too closely affiliated with them. And they're going into an election year with a deeply unpopular president who also has done absolutely nothing. None of the things that are within his power to stop this onslaught against trans people that has literally, it has resulted in over 260,000 fucking internally displaced people so far. And it's continuing. And now, the only way this creates a situation, either they can take the objectively decent position and say the Democrats are absolutely complicit in what the Republicans are doing at this point because they're not using the means at their disposal to put a stop to it. Or, in an election year, which he's never gonna fucking do. Or he can just sort of say, well, you know, maybe trans people can try fucking off. Which is what he's done.
There, right? And then we're okay with it, and everybody would agree. The country is in favor of trans rights, okay?
Well, except you've just said that the country is not in favor of trans rights. Like, you can't have it both. Like, he's redefining trans rights to leave out certain things that those same people who say in polls based on just being on complete ignorance of the issue, complete ignorance, that they're uncomfortable with the idea of trans people being involved in sports, so trans women specifically being involved in sports. Those same people would never accept the idea that they should be banned from sports, like, just because of some, group affiliation they belong to. So, what he's doing here is he's redefining trans rights to include everything except one basic human access to one basic human activity that he would never accept himself being excluded from.
So, but in the midst of these conversations, one of the things that happens is, okay, on air, I say, okay, you're asking, fine. I think at the high school level, trans girls should be able to participate with biological girls.
Cis girls is the term, motherfucker. Like, trans girls are not synthetics. Trans girls are just as biological as anyone. They are biological entities.
Because...
Why do you talk about...
They are featherless bipeds.
But that at all beyond how...
Because it comes up, because there's a bill. I'm fighting against the bill.
You're fighting against the bill, you're making the case for it.
Okay. But why do you talk about it beyond it being a distraction, perfectly cooked up? Because you said you agree with me. Why do you talk about it beyond
because
it
he was lying?
A fucking bill that is laughably unpopular, so unpopular that, like,
Not so unpopular that it didn't pass in all...
Yeah, because popularity doesn't actually matter there. The people do not get any kind of vote in the state. Like, this isn't Cuba. This isn't Cuba, where something like, major fucking overhauls of the legal system have to go to referendum, like the Families Code did. Here, it doesn't really matter. The fucking state legislature, federal legislature can do deeply unpopular things, because the people don't get any meaningful say in any of it.
All the red states.
Wait, what?
The trans bills that passed, not about bathrooms, but about sports and all that horse crap.
But none of those bills were passed with popular support, Jank.
I know they're passed by Republican legislators, and the Republican legislators are appeasing their base.
Okay.
They're not appeasing their base, though. That's the point. Their base doesn't like this. Their base, this stuff is unpopular with their base. Jank himself pointed that out.
And their base is maniacal. No, their base wants it.
Their base. This is wrong.
That you and I are entirely incorrect.
So they go fishing in that area, and in that conversation, I say, "Hold on, let me finish."
Okay.
I say, at some point, look, my real opinion is, at the professional level, yes, of course the leagues get to make their own decision, and sometimes, yes, trans women have an advantage.
Except that that's not true. There's literally no evidence that trans women have any advantage. I mean, unless you declared transness to be a sport. I mean, unless you declared, like, literally being trans to be a sport, the trans women would definitely have an advantage over cis women at that one. But, I mean, there's literally no evidence that trans women have any fucking advantage at sports. And when you point, and at the professional level, trans women have an advantage, motherfucker? Then how come trans women have been admitted to, like, are allowed by the rules of the leagues, most of them, to participate at the professional level, but none of them are?
And the league is allowed to say, no, we're not going to allow it, okay? So what happens next? Every single person that I know in mainstream media saw that what they perceive as a progressive community then called me a Nazi.
That's, like, this is a lie. I mean, as Olayemi pointed out weeks and weeks ago, I mean, what was really almost just pathetic, really, is just how many, like, progressives with platforms, how many, like, left YouTube creators and Twitch creators who had some kind of relationship with the Young Turfs were, like, bending over backwards and explaining it to them like they were 5 years old and they just didn't know what trans people were and stuff like that. Indulged this bullshit idea that they didn't know exactly what they were doing. It was... it was just a pathetic spectacle.
Then they go, okay, progressives are lunatics. I'm writing all of them off, right? Are you kidding me? because somebody's had like this microscopic.
Yeah, I'm sure that somebody looks at people. If people criticize Cenk, that must mean to the objective outside observer that those people are lunatics. Because that's how it works. The objective outside observer naturally determines whether what somebody's mental health status is based on whether Cenk agrees with them.
Difference of opinion with like the most radical end of the progressive base. They're right-wing pivot, Republican, Nazi.
Well, it is a right-wing pivot. I mean, and fucking Anna Transphobian immediately went onto a far-right YouTube channel on stream to just recite the white nationalist catechism and you know, say that fucking Kyle Shittenhouse got a bad rap, and that actually the woman who tried to have a black birdwatcher in Central Park swatted, maybe she had a point. I mean, like, it was just so totally unforced. It was so totally a decision that was made that that didn't even follow in any way from what they were doing. Yeah.
Well, okay, you guys sound nuts. Okay, and don't do that.
You think
just
that-
say,
you think-
Okay, this motherfucker thinks so highly of himself. Like, I mean, he literally thinks that if people criticize his reactionary stances on some shit, that makes them look bad. Rather than him looking bad to the people who have been his audience, and for, like, as long as he's had one, rather than him looking bad to them. Like, he literally thinks that he is the barometer for what people, for optics.
hey,
That's
I
what it took?
disagree, so what?
Mainstream media literally called you a bestiality-loving horsefucker when you tried to run for office in California. You think they needed the fucking... you think they needed like 11 trans people with anime avatars on Twitter calling you a Nazi to be like...
on him on a plate.
I mean, this is just, first of all, it's just such a false premise. That is not what happened. Everybody who responded, nearly everybody, like, particularly, let's say, the white leftists in particular, white cis leftists in particular, who responded, we're all trying to find some way that this was just a misunderstanding, and they were just bending over backwards. It was pathetic. It was like Joe Biden talking about fucking Benjamin Netanyahu.
That's
Adam.
crazy.
And
they
then
have
there
material
are real
interests.
issues that are
They-
much larger
They have
that
material...
also cost us, and it makes it look like we are extreme when in reality 2/3 of the country's on our side. Take the fucking win. Take the win.
It's not a win for some people, motherfucker. Like, I mean, you're the win that he's calling for. It's easy for him to call it a win because it doesn't affect him.
So here's another one, and this one I don't know how you're gonna light up on this one.
No,
I mean, you can just see this motherfucker back in, like, the 60s, looking at the polls, looking at, like, the spectrum of white liberal opinion, and making the same sort of argument, the same sort of bullshit argument about the civil rights movement. Because there were, like, liberal pundits making this exact fucking bullshit argument. Like, oh, it's the most extreme civil rights campaign. You know, the ones who think there shouldn't be Jim Crow at all. You know, here we could take the win. You got some people who say there should be just a little bit Jim Crow as a treat. And they're saying, no, we don't want any. They're just denying us the win. I mean, this was like, we've seen this in so many different fucking versions. This is so old. This is so old school. It has got fucking freezer burn on it.
Keep on the police. It's a terrible slogan.
Okay.
It's not a slogan. It's a fucking demand. Like, I mean, he tries to couch his opposition, his substantive opposition to anything that people who are to the left of him, a group that grows bigger all the time as he moves to the right, want as some sort of, like, bad strategy. Like, the people who were saying that the police should be abolished were really pinning their hopes on Democrats getting elected. Like, I mean, it is just, it's so asinine. It is, I mean, arguing against it, it just is sort of silly, because you have to indulge premises that nobody, including Cenk, would ever believe.
Okay.
A terrible
No,
idea.
we're moving away from other...
Yeah.
Talking points. Let's get back to the one issue that we were talking about. My perspective is that they have every interest to fuck you every single time. Mainstream media does, because of their underlying material interest.
Well, I mean, they have just as much of interest in using him to fuck the working class.
In defending the corporate oligopoly structure that we have. This is who funds them. This is how people rise into positions of power in the media infrastructure. You've been a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, the fact that he has this sort of a platform when people to the left of him do not is itself a reasonably good piece of evidence that his stances are actually closer to those of the ruling class than a lot of people's, or at least the ruling class is a hell of a lot more comfortable with him.
Already, personally, you've seen it happen to you at MSNBC. So, like, there is no reason why they're not looking at, like, magical trans people on Twitter and going, oh, that's it. Here's the reality. They're being crazy again. They're calling Cenk a Nazi.
Yeah, because nobody gives a fuck. Like...
Yes, they are.
No, they're not though. They're not though. It's just fuck you, man.
You're looking for any excuse. I agree with that, but then stop giving them excuses, which is the point you started.
Okay. Well, okay, stop giving them excuses to call you a Nazi, even though that didn't happen. Well, I mean, there's a good way to stop giving people excuses there. Maybe stop adopting right-wing talking points and trying to repackage it as some sort of fucking liberal fourth-dimensional chess.
Okay. there's a major disagreement here. We are at odds,
but we're not at odds.
Oh fuck! See here, this is his only move. This is his version of Section 2 of the Communist Manifesto for Caleb Muppet. Yeah, all he does, Caleb Muppet just trots out 2 paragraphs from Marx every single time he wants to pretend that he has a position, has a point. And what Cenk does is anytime somebody is making a fundamental disagreement with him, from the left of him, he pretends that there is no disagreement.
You say don't talk about it. I say don't talk about it.
Yeah, but you're the one talking about it.
You say you're against the bill. I say I'm against the bill.
Yeah, except that you're the one making fucking arguments in favor of the bill. You can't say you're against the bill when all you do is affirm the entire propaganda on which that bill rests. Like, if you want to say you're against the bill as a person with a platform, you know, one thing that you really absolutely have to do is debunk the propaganda that is behind the bill. Like, point out that actually there is no evidence anywhere at all that trans women have any kind of advantage at any sports.
You're for trans rights. I'm for trans rights.
No, you're not. You've already said you're not.
But my point...
Like, I mean, what do you define trans rights, motherfucker? Like, what other rights have you decided do not fall under trans rights so that you can then claim that you're for them?
But the difference is the same people that call you transphobic...
Because he is...
also called me transphobic all the fucking time.
See, okay, chat, maybe you can help me out here. I don't really follow Hassan too much. Is there some reason... I have not heard of him being called transphobic. And I have not... in particular, seen the people who point out that Cenk is transphobic because he fucking is. He objectively is that thing. I haven't heard any of them say the same thing about Hassan. I mean, maybe there's some deep lore that I am not familiar with here, but I mean, I haven't seen, like, tons of people who I've never heard say a bad thing about Hassan have pointed out correctly that what Cenk is doing is transphobic.
The difference is, I don't change my perspective at the end of the day, or even offer it any fucking additional light, because who fucking cares? You just do what you think is right, and you keep pushing.
Yeah, except the thing is, this who fucking cares is fine, except for the part where we're still talking about taking away basic human rights from a marginalized population that most people have absolutely no exposure to, no knowledge of, no real understanding of, who's and who have never actually, that most people have never heard speak in defense of their own rights and their own dignity. So you can't just say who gives a fuck. You absolutely have a responsibility, if you've got a platform and you're talking about these sorts of things, to say, yeah, the entire propaganda, the whole thing is bullshit. There's no evidence that supports this. This is just Nazis saying Nazi shit. And what Cenk does is, I mean, he thinks he's slick, because he will suggest that the people who are supporting trans rights, which he opposes, like, he's made it very clear he opposes. You can claim that he can claim that this is a tactical decision to oppose some trans rights all he wants, and redefine trans rights as if that's actually fooling anybody. But at the end of the day, he is an opponent of trans rights. It's like saying you're for Palestinian rights, except for that thing about return, and except for that thing about resisting occupation. There's a word for people who support trans rights, support Palestinian rights, except for the right of return and except for the right to resist occupation. They're called opponents of Palestinian rights. Because you can't just, they're indivisible. You can't just say, you can't just sort of pick and choose other people's rights that you can be for. Especially when you're talking about some, like, marginalized group of people who are under massive attack. Like, you either come to their defense, or you can fuck off.
And I think that it's very dangerous and very scary when you get moved by...
I mean, I guess if Joe Biden can be fucking president, then... yeah, maybe everybody gets to be president for 5 minutes. Maybe president is the new version of UKIP leader.
Your base of support that you have worked tirelessly for 20 years and, like, building and solidifying,
and now alienating,
turning on you and saying you're right wing now.
Yeah, because he's objectively moved to the right on this position.
I think that
didn't happen, though.
Yeah, it did happen, though. This motherfucker, he on the way, you can have it one way or you can have it the other. Either everybody was calling you a Nazi for being against trans rights, or there was no alienation of your supporters, who are much more likely to be supportive of the viewers who are much more likely to be supportive of trans rights, the real full catalog of trans rights, than your average member of the public. You can't have it both ways.
I agree with you. It's 11 people.
Oh, he goes again. I agree. The Cenk drinking game. I mean, you could not use I agree with you, or I do not disagree as one of the things in the drinking game, because you would need a new liver. Like, within 15 minutes, you would not only have drunk yourself out of house and home, but you would need to be on the fucking transplant list.
On Twitter. So our audience is just as gigantic as it's always been, so you can go ahead and cry about it if you're among those 11 people.
11 people. Like, if it was 11 people, I mean, if he believed that it was 11 people, think about how pathetic it would be that he's been banging on about this shit, that it was 11, that only 11 random people objected to. I mean, if we believe him, then he's pathetic.
So I'm not...
Like, 11 people I've had more people than that call me all sorts of horrible things. Most of them are people nobody has to give a fuck about, who are, like, fucking anonymous accounts and stuff like that. And I don't dwell on it. Why? Because they're a bunch of fucking randos. And he's saying that this is just 11 randos objecting to his transphobia, and therefore he's decided to just go everywhere and defend his transphobia against the 11 randos. Because the 11 randos, those are the people who hold the real power.
I'm not worried about that. Haas, I gave it as a small example, and defund the police is a much larger example.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
Progressives are getting pigeonholed by mainstream media and Republicans as radicals, when in...
Like, what's bad about being radical, though? I mean, when you have a bad thing, you want to get rid of the whole thing, not just, the symptoms of the thing. I mean, radical just means you grab the problem by the roots.
In reality, We are the overwhelming majority of the country.
Yeah, the thing is that those are not contradictions. He's like literally doesn't seem to know what the fuck radical means. Because you can have a majority that is radical. I mean, if you actually, for example, you look at polling on the Israeli Jewish population on like issues of, say, racism and Palestinian rights, and you will find the majority, or close to a majority, take some pretty fucking radical positions. Like, I mean, in favor of just ethnic cleansing, for example. The fact that that a lot of people support something does not make it less radical. Because radical is not a thing, a descriptor that is based on how many people support a thing.
So we need to focus and get our messaging right.
And that's why, look,
When you say you're a leftist but bust unions, perhaps radical views might worry you. Yes, true enough. Yeah, I mean, he's the union busting pro-labor broadcaster. I mean,
like, that's why looking at a couple random people and greatly emphasizing the impact that they have, and even attributing like the mainstream media's perspective shift on progressives, when you and I both know that they never fucking gave a shit, and they don't even need like a couple of random trans people to call you a transphobe.
but he is a transphobe, though. That is not unjustified. The whole fact that he's doing this whole thing where it's like, oh well, I'm for trans rights. Well, except for the thing about sports. Like, I mean, that's transphobic. And Hassan does not get to acquit him of that. I mean, I guess it's awkward they are related, but, I mean, but you don't get to just act like that is a wild accusation when he is just spewing transphobic shit.
To, like, justify their hatred for progressives. Okay,
let's go to a larger
There's no
issue.
reason to talk about that. Now, as far as like, there was one other point that I wanted to make, because we were talking about state legislatures. This is really important, please. I think that a broader Republican project, and I think you'll agree with me on this, has been that they want to dismantle the power of the legislative body and then utilize the state legislatures where they know they have control due to gerrymandering.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, putting Hassan in Cheng's chair would make the Young Turfs so much more watchable. I mean, I have my disagreements with Hassan, but at the very least, he's a hell of a lot more sense. Yeah. Well, because the idea is, it's liberalism. Liberals want to think that that whatever the positions they personally are okay with are the absolute definition of the boundary of the leftmost place you're allowed to go. And if somebody then says, well, actually, I think that sucks, I think we should do better than that, then they can say, oh, you're just one of those 11 randos that are completely irrelevant, and that therefore I have to go on every single fucking stream and platform to defend myself against the 11 randos. But I see we are running out of time. It is nearly 1, and I just want to thank everyone. For one thing, big thanks to Femme Dracula. It's great to see you. I have missed you in chat. Thank you to Hiroko. Thank you to Erica and Adria and everybody who was lurking. I will be back tomorrow at 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. That sounds like you probably have more interesting things going on in your life, and I think it's good to have interesting things going on in your life, even if I do miss having you in chat. And we will continue the JabroniCon. And let me just say, I just really hope that every fucking U.S. plane with an Israeli pilot has a serious equipment malfunction, and that the Palestinians can finally get some kind of fucking reprieve from this. It is really kind of horrible to sit here with absolutely nothing that I can actually do about it, and just watch this shit in real time. But it's even worse for, like, Palestinian friends and comrades who have, like, family in Gaza, and my heart just goes out to them. But let's just hope this bullshit ends, and that Israel does not get to meet their maximum objective here, and may the Palestinian resistance be victorious in the long run, if not in the short. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.